Hello, all, and welcome back to History with R&R Live. We've been away for a bit, but we're back.
A little bit.
I don't know if that's a good thing, a bad thing, or should everybody start running? Although I do like that, my split personality is showing itself in its full colors, and I'm rambling Canuck in chat and History with R&R on the damn screen. So this should be fun.
I'm kind of concerned with the Hindenburg crashing on Mars in the background there, Jeff.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's a Yitza creation back there.
Well, it's just because we have poor Jeff crashing and everything in our radio shows.
Yeah. I'm dying just about every
he
episode.
Has this dim look on history.
Where do you guys do that radio show thing?
Well, we're supposed to be doing another one. I just haven't sat down and wrote the thing yet. But
I was wondering
eventually
about that.
it'll be midway.
Because that's kind of interesting. I had at one point before DC and I stopped speaking, he was talking about doing a radio show thing, and I had volunteered to do some stuff on that one, and that just fell through, and then everything kind of went to hell there.
Yeah, well, the radio show for here is something that Doom came up with, and it's just something that basically you put live reporters back when there was no live reporters. and it can be really interesting, but it can be a real pain in the ass to write because you've got to figure out excuses why there's like for instance, when I'm writing Midway, I've got to come up with a reason why I have Jeff on an aircraft carrier. Because in World War II, that is not going to fly.
No.
They're just not gonna know. And they sure as heck ain't gonna be reporting live.
Yeah, pretty much.
Right. So you've got to come up with some reason why Jeff is on the Titanic and how Jeff is reporting to us. And yeah, it's interesting. But at any rate, welcoming to the chat, of course, Mrs. Canuck, and also Potato. Right? Why did Mrs. Canuck delete her message? Anyway,
sure.
Also Potato Revan, welcome, sir, and of course we have Jeff in chat. So today, depending on how long we go, because we probably are going to get canceled real quick because YouTube loves these conversations. Farv has decided we're going to start back. We're going to start back with a bang, and we're going to just rip that Band-Aid right the hell off, and we're going to start talking about topics that YouTube just loves.
Hey, yo, I suggested
nice
you made the decision.
We'll be back someday, maybe.
We'll be back someday. I will endeavor to avoid certain words that the whatever her name is, Karen or whatever that runs this place doesn't seem to like.
Would that be sunshine? Hello, and I don't know. They change daily. Oh boy. All right. So without further ado or joking around, I'll let Farv start us off, and then I'll chime in as usual when I want to add some useless information.
Right. So my brother and I, we've talked about this a few times because my brother actually grew up part of his childhood in Germany. We've talked a lot about the way, especially in current day, that people like to look back on World War II and demonize the entirety of Germany and the German army. There's very little differentiation between the average person, between the Wehrmacht, the Luftwaffe, and the Schutzstaffel, for example.
Yeah.
It's like, no, they were all evil madmen who murdered children. I'm like, and the generalization is very stupid.
Well, yeah, and I mean, if you really want to confuse people, just talk to them. What's the difference between the brown shirts and the black shirts, and the red shirts? If you really want to get technical, but
well, you can't get half of anybody to identify, the relevance of the Wehrmacht.
Yeah,
especially when it comes to who did and didn't agree with certain decisions made at the governmental level.
And also, too, I mean, like a lot of times we don't. You got to sit there and realize, do you want a job? Yeah. Okay. Well,
I was like,
welcome to the party line.
yeah. And that was the thing too. In particular, now I won't go too much into Rommel because if I get into Rommel, I'll be here all day. But Erwin Rommel, the primary thing, and nobody talks about this guy no more, but the primary thing that motivated him in the end, when he was basically told, okay, well, let me backpedal. There was a group of command figures, officers, I believe spearheaded by Stauffenberg, who was an aristocratic German officer in the Wehrmacht. There was a buildup of officers in the Wehrmacht in particular that did not agree with the Fuhrer's decisions nor his vision for the future of Germany. And unofficially, Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, was one of those men. But he had taken it directly to the Fuhrer himself and said, things are not going well.
No.
We are at the point where we cannot win this war. We need to start trying to bargain and make peace with the Allied forces. But of course, the Fuhrer would not hear this. He would not hear it. He would not abide by it. And so these suggestions went nowhere, despite the popularity and the status of Rommel. And it became concerning to the Fuhrer because Rommel became known as the People's Field Marshal. He was incredibly popular in Germany with the Wehrmacht and most of the average citizenry. Everybody knew who the Desert Fox was in Germany.
Well, yeah, because he had been, championed so hard.
Yeah.
To Mr.
And he
Goebbels.
was also well known for doing things like ignoring kill orders.
Yeah, he also, well, the thing with Rommel was he was one of the few field commanders that didn't necessarily wait for his orders to come from Berlin, which is why a lot of people say that D-Day would have actually gone differently had Rommel been on the ground and not at home.
It might have.
Because a lot of people say that, and there's no way to prove it one way or the other, because again, you'd have to go back, put Rommel in that position. But when D-Day happens, Rommel isn't on the ground; he's at home. And if he had been, if a lot of people speculate that the commanders that were on the ground waited and waited and waited, like when the attack started. The leader of Germany was still sleeping, and they waited till he woke up to tell him. If Rommel, and of course, because the orders were that, the panzer units and such could not move without direct authorization from the leader of Germany.
Right.
That gave the Allies a little bit of breathing room.
Yeah.
If Rommel had been there, he would not have been waiting for a message from Berlin.
Yeah. And this kind of goes back to, if you want to look at, for people who aren't as familiar, the evidence in the Africa campaign. At the time, Africa was largely a British-held territory. So when Rommel led his forces in, the people in Africa, by and large, referred to him as the Great Liberator. Rommel was immensely popular in Africa with the people there because he was breaking them, in their eyes, free of the oppressive rule of the British. And he had things pretty well in hand there until that one loss. And then, for whatever reason, the Fuhrer decided that the Africa campaign was a distraction. It was not important to him. So he stopped diverting supplies. He cut the supply lines to the Africa Corps, and after the major loss they took there, he just pulled Rommel back from the front.
Yeah, well, he ends up pulling Rommel back, but the other thing too was they lost a lot of ground when it came to the Mediterranean.
Yes.
Mediterranean really did do a lot of the whatever happened in the Mediterranean affected the African Corps
Mhm.
because they couldn't get supplies through, for one.
Yeah.
The British had a full fleet, plus they had Malta, and there was no taking Malta after a certain period. They had a shot at it, but it just they bombed the heck out of it, but they never occupied it, and I don't think they could ever keep it for any length of time.
Yeah. Now, in my
So
opinion, there are three big factors to the whole fallacy of people looking back and considering the whole of the German army to be devils. And one is very few people talk about the conspiracy to assassinate the Fuhrer, or who was behind it for that matter. A lot of people like to say that the Allies and the French were behind it, which is completely wrong.
well, it depends on which one.
Well, the one
There
that was,
I believe, and don't quote me on this, but if I remember right, there are 45 confirmed assassination attempts on him, something along the lines of that. Not all of them were spectacular, or
it was the attempted bomb.
Oh, the bomb. Yeah,
That was the one that the Wehrmacht was behind.
Okay, so the one that he
Yes.
he ended up injured in, and people ended up shot over.
Great few were executed, and others were sent to the camps. That people like to. This is the other thing too, is like the fallacy that only the Jews were sent to the concentration camps. Kind of, there were plenty of German citizens, members of the clergy, teachers, German officers who weren't executed outright were sent to these camps along with everyone else.
Yeah, well, a lot of Russian soldiers ended up there too. But
that's true.
What the difference being, I guess, is in that case, majority rules, because the numbers of the other prisoners don't get to the numbers of the Jewish prisoners, is why it is that way. There were more of one group than there was of another.
I have a number of examples here that are kind of completely antithetical to the notion that everyone in the German army were insane, evil people.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's a member of the party, I'll call them, who may be familiar to some of you, called Oskar Schindler.
Oh, yes.
This is a man who had a factory in Poland while it was occupied, but then was using his monies as connections to protect 1,000 Jewish people that worked for him.
Yep.
He was literally bribing the Schutzstaffel.
Yeah. But it comes back to topics where I get in trouble too, is if you think about it this way, we look back at battles, we look back at wars, we look back at anything with rose-colored glasses, especially if we won. Because what we do is, like, for instance, the bombing of Britain was the most heinous thing known to man. The bombing of every European city, not so much. Like, oh yeah, we leveled that place, but
there were two people who were actively trying to work with the technically, depending on how you want to define it, work with both the Russians and the ally and other members of the Allies. Heinz Harro Schulz-Boysen was actually executed because while he was in the Luftwaffe, he was trying to radio Russia to warn them about the invasion ahead of time.
Oh yeah, well, see, and that's the crazy part, because there are now documents that prove that there were so many warnings that when it came to Barbarossa, that it was, what it ends up being a tale of is what happens when a leader is too confident that this other leader is going to do what he thinks he's going to do.
Yeah.
And the biggest problem with Barbarossa, in my opinion, from what I've been able to research, which I've dabbled in it a little bit, is that Stalin was convinced there would be no way in Hades that Germany would risk a war on two fronts. One, because of a little book that a certain leader wrote, where he said that there's no way that Germany can win a war on two fronts. So he was under the impression that there'd be no way that they would go to war with Russia until after Britain fell.
Yeah. And see, here's the thing. When I mentioned the man from the Luftwaffe, now I was correct. Klaus von Stauffenberg was the leader of the July 1944 bomb plot, who was, of course, executed when his involvement was discovered. But another man, Wilhelm Franz Canaris, he was the head of the Abwehr, and he was not only promoting resistance, but he was trying to find ways to connect with the Allies and work with them behind the Fuhrer's back. And after the July bomb plot failed, he was found and executed as well.
Yeah.
But this brings something my brother brought up on Discord because he's watching. He said, there's nothing as evil as making this all a cartoon. This removes what lurks in the mundane and the heart of man. It's a thing to struggle with because modern depictions do their best to suggest only monsters could be that kind of evil.
Yeah.
And he lived in Germany, so he points this out also. It takes away from redemption. I lived in Germany, and as I did, I saw more than a few old, the N-word that YouTube doesn't like, the party, seeking out the people that they harmed, hoping to make amends later in life. He's like, as much as we can make it easier for folks to deny reality, we are also ignoring that people can change and become something better.
Yes. Well, the problem with it became that, well, in order to justify some of the actions that we did, you really have to be against the most evilest of evil so that our transgressions pale in the comparison. Now, I'm not saying that we should have done half the stuff we did because we did what we thought we had to do to win a war, but the underwhelmingness of what we did was okay, everything they did was bad. Come on now. Dresden would like to have a conversation. Just saying.
Well,
but you know, so we look back as victors and we go, well, we were up against the most evil regime ever to come to man. And now we throw it around. The scary part, I think, the scariest part about this whole thing is in the modern vernacular, just disagreeing with somebody now.
Yeah.
Is you get put on that level of evil. And it's like, huh? What? No, I just don't agree with you. You know, I mean, you look at what's happened over the last 3 years with a certain worldwide thing. I won't go too far into that, but I mean, you look at the divisions there, and I mean, you would think that people were throwing babies out windows. You know, it's just what?
Oh, that's not as bad.
You know, like it to me.
There's also there's a big thing, and a lot of people who have, we'll just say, agendas like to play with history and perception because they don't like to allow. There's this popular thing. Oh, well, Hitler was clearly insane. I'm sorry, I said the word. The Fuhrer was clearly insane because only an insane person could be this evil and do these horrible things, because they don't like to let it play back into very similar things that the United States and Britain and any other country had done during World War II or World War I. But more importantly, those with an agenda don't like it to get tied back to the notion that these are things commonly done with communist or socialist leaders.
Yeah,
Because they hate the idea
it's
to
not
point
even
out
that.
that
It's
the
not
Nazis were
even.
communists.
I mean, if you really want to see people's heads turn on a swivel, go back right before the war. So if you go back 1932 to about 1936, and you take a look at Germany's euthanasia program, and if you read what was coming out of the medical journals of the United States,
Yep.
you will find that they were praising Germany for leading the way.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, and that was
But we
such a
don't talk about
thing.
that now.
Well, you forgot the other part is that at points, members of the German government were criticizing some of the American ideas for being too harsh.
Yeah. So it's all nice in hindsight is 2020. But I mean, like, for instance, I mean, the first gas chambers that were built, they were built by doctors. They weren't built by SS.
No.
They were built by doctors. That let that sink in for a second.
I believe that
they were built by doctors. Okay, so
I believe it was wasn't
figure.
it Dr.
Kind of goes against do no harm.
Yeah. There's that little problem, but
well, the German, quote unquote German, the Workers' Party doctors were well known for carrying out their medical experiments on prisoners.
Oh yeah, well the biggest war criminal that has never been brought to trial was a doctor, Mengele.
Yeah. And everybody, it's like everybody knows that name, but so few people understand why.
Yeah. Mengele never faced a tribunal at the end of the war. He somehow disappeared off the face of the planet.
Which is disgusting when you look at so many years later when former German officers were being dragged to tribunals in their 80s and 90s, some of whom couldn't even remember what they were being asked.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, like a lot of people right, so the other thing too is that you have points in history where we have to, as a society, fall on the right side of history. There's that lovely little phrase, the right side of history. If you see one of the famous ways when I used to debate things like this, or one of the favorite little talking points, if you're running a propaganda machine real quick, is will you fall on the right side or the wrong side of history?
That is a downright venomous phrase.
That's a lovely little catchphrase, but it has some very interesting implications.
That phrase in itself is just poisonous.
Yes. But yeah, I mean, like, not every single person in Germany was really went like, I mean, you could look at it like this. In the modern vernacular, if you take a look at any country, Canada, the United States, are there people that completely 100%, no matter what, will support Trudeau? I'll use Canadian politics. Ha ha ha.
Unfortunately.
Right? The answer to that is yes. But there is also a part of the country that goes, what the ever-loving hell? Right?
Yeah.
And you can say the same thing in Britain. You can say the same thing in the United States. You can say the same thing in France. You can say the same thing in Germany now.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You will have those hardliners. You will have those people. You will also have those people that, I mean, let's be real for a second. What is not talked about is for the first 3 years, that the party, we'll say, was in power. Well, what did they do? Well, they created the Autobahn.
Mm-hmm.
They brought people from the brink of starvation back to being part of the civilization. Now, how they did that is another story, but in public opinion, hey, my money is worth something again? Ha! Booyah! I love this guy, right?
Pretty much.
Or I was out of work for 2 years, and then this guy came along, and now I can put food on the
And
table.
with you
I
bringing
love
that up,
this guy. I will follow this guy till the end of the earth.
with you bringing that up, it kind of brings up the whole issue with the popular opinion that the man was just an insane, evil madman. No, he unfortunately was very intelligent.
Yes.
His problem was his ego and his judgment were not always the best things for him or the country.
Well, not only that, but honestly, I think if he would have had a little bit more trouble in France, there might have been a little bit of a different war. But because, everything went off pretty much without a hitch, you couldn't have planned that better. Caught the French flat-footed.
Well, and then the government capitulated.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. They caught them flat-footed. There are points in history right now that are so contested. Like you can go into forums, you can go into conversations, and there will be arguments until the cows come home. The Dunkirk is a good one. There are people that say Dunkirk only happened because he wanted peace with Britain. There are people that say he never wanted peace with Britain, and you can get those two people in a room and that'll be an interesting conversation for about 4 hours and they'll still get nowhere. Zach makes the point, if only he'd been accepted to art school. Yeah. Well, or if he had been kept in the military. Because here's the other little tidbit for fun. The only reason that the leader of Germany ends up in the meetings of the party, we'll say, is because he was sent there to report back to the military. Right? It's the only reason he was there to begin with. And then, he slowly starts learning he can speak. He starts finding, people in his ear, yada, 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 and history takes over.
Yep.
Geez, if you really want to go that way, once, if that mortar would have landed a little bit closer to him, and blew him out of the trench, what would have happened then? He was on the front line in World War I. Stray bullet, what happens then? But I think for a lot of people, you have to be able to demonize and they have to be the most horrible person, or the most, the whole country had to be. And it was that way because that's what our propaganda made it. Right? We did it during World War I, the Huns, right?
Yeah.
We did it during World War I. We did it during World War II. We did it every war since. And it's because we have to be on the moral high ground, right? We have to have the moral high ground for us to do something. So for us, And I mean, you can go back into history. Anytime there's a victorious army, they were always the saviors. I mean, hell, if you think about it, Stalin presented himself as the savior of Eastern Europe. The father, the loving father, you know. But oy vey. You know, so when we're trying to get the population on our side, we tend to sell a bag of goods. You know, we have the moral high ground. I mean, go back into the Castles and Dragons, you know, God is on our side. We have the righteous, you know,
Yeah.
God has declared that we must retake the Holy Land for the 50 millionth time. You know, stuff like that. But we always frame it that we are on the moral high ground. You know, even if we were sitting down to brunch the day before with the people that we are now going to go and massacre. You know, yeah, things happen. You know, oh darn.
Things.
You know, so it has always been that we have to sit there and go, well, they were the most terrible people in the world. Meanwhile, it was probably, I mean, let's face it, not even all of the SS were real hard party liners.
No, well, some of them were former police. It's just
Yeah.
that a lot of them took to the power entirely too quickly, and
Well,
that
that and
became
if
the
you know,
issue.
do you want a job? You know, right? Like seriously. And it was prestigious. You know, especially in the early years, it was
Yeah.
prestigious as all hell to have that SS on your shoulder.
And in Germany, also, there was still, especially at that time, it was a big deal to be prestigious for your family. So the whole thing, we talked about Rommel earlier. The whole reason that everyone heard that Rommel essentially was made to take poison when his alleged involvement in the bomb plot was discovered, in that he knew a couple of the people that were involved. Well, because of his status and his family status in the public view, especially, the Fuhrer decided that it would be far too damaging for this to become massive public knowledge.
Yeah.
So he sent men to Rommel's home and told him that if he would take the poison rather than endure a public execution, which would bring shame to a lot of people, including his family, that the Fuhrer would ensure that his family was taken care of and his family name would not be dragged through the mud.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Tino from Lost Battlefields always points out after the war, you know, companies, people, to this day, even, oh no, we had nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
All the people to blame, they're dead, right? At the end of the war, it was surprising how anybody that had anything to do with anything that went bad in Germany are already dead, right? Nobody, you know, oh no, I had nothing to do with that. That was so and so. Well, so and so is already dead. Yeah, but it was all so and so. You know, and it's just funny to me because I mean, some of these companies are still around today. Volkswagen. But you know, it's lawyers looking at you. You know, the Siemens did a whole bunch of work for them. You know, oh well. But at the same time, the SS was run a lot. You know, from what I've been able to gather, like a well-oiled money-making machine. I mean, it's kind of crazy. Now that we look back on it, and we don't look at it like that anymore. We just, you know, if you see the SS symbol, they were all they did was concentration camps and killed people. Well, if you were talking about the Waffen SS or the SS in, tank corps, they were some of the most feared mother truckers on the battlefield because they were good. And they had the best equipment and they had all that fun stuff until the end of the war, when you now have, the last of the last, and it's no longer your prime crop. But yeah, I mean, it is kind of a misjudgment and a misjustice that we characterize an entire people for the sins of few.
Yeah.
Right?
And sadly, like you said, in a lot of
thing too
cases, it's either political or social propagandized.
Yeah, and the other thing too is, okay, you're saying, well, if they were against it and it was wrong, why didn't they fight? Well, they did. Just we don't talk about it much.
Yeah, we don't.
The other thing,
the amount
thing
of people
too-
in the Wehrmacht and in political, stations and whatnot, and even just general working people who were trying to get people out of Germany, nobody talks about it.
Well, and the other thing that nobody talks about, and this one I'll get in trouble for, but oh well. There is a period right before World War II breaks out where people were given passports.
Yeah.
And documents. Get out. Get out now. We don't want you. And there were ships of refugees that went around the world. United States, Canada, Australia, Britain. And they were all turned away.
Yeah.
And sent back. And a lot of those people that were sent back, well, their days were numbered. And then some went, closer to Russia, which ended up being safe for a short period of time until tanks started rolling that way. So we look back and we expunge ourselves of all the blame. But at the same time, really, if you would have maybe, how many people would have been saved here? How many people would have been saved there? In retrospect, we can look back and go, well, we should have done this. Well, you should have, could have, didn't. Right? But we don't talk about that. We just talk about the end result. And we try not to mention things that we may have done that were a little shaky. And
well, we were the victors. We didn't want to look bad.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is led to a lot of discussions. Sadly, not too much anymore because you can't have a discussion anymore. You have an argument. Or you get canceled, or my favorite little tidbit is you get the growing thing now is we're moving away from, like, when I was growing up, when I was between the ages of 8 and 15, if a person had been somewhere, right? Like, let's say they'd been to Bosnia, or they'd been to Iraq, or they'd been to wherever, or they were on the Solomon Islands, or they were in Germany when it fell, or whatever the case may be. Their word held weight. And now you have it where they get one little factoid wrong because they were a small piece of a major puzzle, right? But from their perspective, this is what was happening, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, you're wrong. This is what happened. We actually, as a group, and historians have a really bad habit of doing this. Of you're wrong. This is what happened. They lived it, buddy. Where were you?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. The Marine that's on the shores does not know what's going on over here. I get you. They don't get the full tapestry. But you don't get to sit there and tell me that everything that they say is discredited because they got the date wrong in their transcript.
Especially when a lot of what the historians get is third-hand information
Right?
anyway.
Like it's like
good point.
I don't give a flying F, right? Like what they're saying you should be taking with some weight and not trying to disprove them every 5 minutes. Right?
Yeah.
Because that's another thing. You get a vet, or you get somebody, who's trying to go, look, from our perspective, this is what it was. And no, this is the truth. I'm sorry, you're wrong here. Your memory must be faded. Blah, blah, blah. And it's like, come here, smack. And then you carry on your day. And then we wonder why veterans don't come forward anymore. Right? We're always sitting here and we're going, I wish vets would tell their story. I wish they'd tell us. No, you don't.
Well, we have a tendency to get either mocked, called liars, or just outright
or
ignored.
or the like when Mr. CCDV and I did the series, and he'd be like, "Oh, I can't remember the name of that camp. I've got to get the name of the." Did you could call it a kangaroo camp? Who gives a damn?
It's like I went
right?
to Iraq,
You were
and
there.
I can't
You're
remember
just
half
saying,
of the
look,
names.
We were here.
Of
we
places
were in this
we were near.
general area. You don't need to pinpoint it on a map because guess what? It's irrelevant.
And I hate that
Right.
because I can't remember half the places I was in or near in Iraq.
Yeah.
Like I remember Tikrit, Baghdad, and I remember coming out of Kuwait. I can't remember those names because A, they're weird freaking names. And secondarily, there was a lot of other crap I was concerned with more so than the name of wherever the hell we happen to be.
Yeah, like am I, is that a box or is that gonna go boom?
Right.
These are the things that were on my mind, not what city I was in at the time.
Exactly.
Or what the road was called. Just let me get home, please. That would be nice. And the funny part is you can learn so much because you have the overview, right? You have the overview now, looking back, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have the overview of these different events, and you can armchair quarterback now any position in history, which is fine. But you also have to think about it this way. You don't know what it was like on the ground. So you ask a question, well, why did these people not rise up? And then this guy in the corner is going, well, the reason is the first 6 people who did that ended up shot in the head. People learned real quick that was a bad idea. Yeah. Right? But you're on the overview and you're going, well, this just doesn't make sense.
And it could
and then
be
the guy on the ground is
for...
going to tell you, well, the reason is
it's like
people did try that. They just got shot in the head.
Disagreeing could get you in the deepest shit. Like for all the talk about Stalinism, that was going on in Germany too.
Yep. So it just comes down to, I think what we need to do is we need to take a lot of the things with a little bit more of a grain of salt than we do.
Mm-hmm.
And stop, and realize war is war. Okay. We did things that in retrospect we'd probably not be proud of if they were in a textbook. And then there are some just absolute heinous stuff that was done in World War II on the other side. There is
Mhm.
no discrediting that. But at the same time, we can't stay focused there.
It was a war. Everybody did scummy crap. The Russians, the
Mhm.
Germans, the Italians, the Japanese, the Americans. Nobody's innocent.
I mean, if you really want to get technical, I mean, some of the stuff that the Russians did when they took Berlin.
It was terrible. The Red Army
Um,
were bastards.
That'll make your skin crawl. But with that, folks, I'm going to let everybody do their little wrap up and promotion, and then we're going to get out of here. So I'm going to start with our guest, Farv. If there's anything you want to promote, if there's anything
Sure.
you want to shout out or yell about, go right ahead, and then we'll get out of here.
I don't want to yell. I got a migraine, but I got a channel called Farvithian Guard here on YouTube. It's a gaming channel. Once in a while, my brother and I will get a bug up our collective butt and talk about something more serious, but that's kind of sporadic. And then I do have a book called The Farvithia Chronicle, which is why my channel's named what it is. And I was working on that for a couple of years. It's published now, out on Amazon, and I'm presently working on the second book. So look that up on Amazon. It's the Farvithia Chronicle. It's spelled similarly to my name with no N on the end of it. And that's all I got.
Awesome. All right, Jeff, I believe you have a show that you guys do on some other channel that I don't know about.
Actually, I have a couple now.
Oh,
you may not be aware of my newest one. So I do co-host on two other channels. As everyone probably already knows, I am a part of the Question of Trek team on Sundays at 4:30 Eastern time. We have a quiz show on Star Trek, and we have a lot of fun, a lot of banter, and a little quiz that goes along with it. So do check us out. You can be a contestant on that. Just contact me on Twitter. Now, if you'd like to be on this channel, just as Farv is today, we'd love to have you. So get a hold of me. There are links in the text chat, Discord, or Twitter. Also, just started last Saturday, co-hosting on another channel, John DeMarco's channel. We're doing Jep Nerdy on Saturdays at 9 o'clock. So if you'd like to play on Jep Nerdy, be there this Saturday. And
awesome.
We'll see you there.
All right. And definitely do get, if you want to be on this channel, don't worry. We don't always have intelligent conversations like we have today. I mean, we've had Potato Revan on here. So, I mean, there's.
Oh, my God.
Wow.
Whoa.
I mean, geez.
And Revan just put Far's book in the chat there.
Yes,
Appreciate
I saw
it,
that. I had to bug him, though. But at any rate, with that, as my old co-host used to say, thank you and good night.